Welcome, everyone. I know, welcome. I know we're starting a little bit, we're starting a little later after a wonderful All Saints worship. We're getting started on stories along the way. Thank you for participating and in this conversation. And as before, I'm recording this so that those who keep up through our YouTube channel can receive it, but I pause the recording when you're having, if you're having smaller conversations around your tables. Now for the large group conversation, I leave the recording on, so you can be aware of that in your own participation today. This is a continuing story of some of the sights and experiences along El Camino de Santiago in the north of Spain. But also, you know, it's daily walking for many hours. And so it allows that time for processing those experiences. And as you've heard in prior sessions, it raised a lot of questions for me. For my own reflection, that I wanted to invite you into both some of the stories and some of the questions. So we're going to continue. Last time I said it was a focus on saints and angels and public witness. And we had quite a rich conversation around Santa Maria, or Mary, the Mother of our Lord, and the place of Mary in the Christian faith. In Catholic Spain, there's a great deal of devotion to Mary, and we had a wonderful conversation here around what does that mean? Who is Mary for us? How is or isn't Mary a part of our own life of faith, our prayer, our observance, our telling of the story of our faith? And so I know I enjoyed hearing from many of you, and I wanted to start today by simply inviting if there were any follow-up questions or comments or reflections that you've had on Mary. This isn't your only or last chance, but I want to pick up from where we left off last time. Yes?
Well, as I told you, when we were in Iceland, there is a modern church in this capital where they do have a stained glass window of Mary and an altar under it and several pews so you can sit and pray.
Thank you. In Iceland, a fairly modern church has a side altar, one could say, or a little chapel, where
and it was definitely Lutheran.
And it's a Lutheran church.
It's a Lutheran church, and in the back they had a place for candles to light for the prayers that you find in the Catholic Church. And he said, and the guy who was selling the tickets to go up the tower, which is why we were there, because it's on top of a hill, so you get a good view. He said, "Oh yeah, there's nothing. I didn't think it was an ordinary. I mean, it wasn't."
Thank you for that example. And I think I shared with you. Now, Martin Luther had a great deal of devotion to Mary and appreciation for Mary as the Mother of God, as the woman who said yes to the angel's invitation, that God's invitation through the angel Gabriel, and so on. But certainly, in the years following the Protestant Reformations, both in the Lutheran tradition, in the Reformed tradition especially, and then in Anabaptist traditions, it became important for many to define themselves over against Catholics. And so sort of getting rid of appreciation or devotion to Mary went on that chopping block for a lot of Protestant traditions. And in the flow of immigration to North America, many of our ancestors, maybe, who were Protestant, may have come to North America in the 1800s when that was pretty much at a height. And so that some of that aversion to some of the Catholic teachings around Mary as well as the saints carried over and was firmly planted in the United States. And whereas many parts of Europe moved on from that in the Protestant churches, like that Lutheran church in Iceland, and have really come full circle in some ways in appreciation, some of our Protestant traditions in North America remain stuck where we were in the 1800s because of the expression of the faith that came with the immigrants that did not continue to evolve around shared appreciation, particularly in and through Vatican II and post-Vatican II dialogues with the Catholic Church. So that's one thing I would look up. Anything else? All right. Well, this is Saint Ignatius of Loyola, an important Spanish saint. But first, I'm going to start with these pictures as I'm leaving the region of La Rioja, a small region full of vineyards and wonderful red wine. There's the hill of Roldan, where he battled the giant Farragut. Now, is Valerie here? No. She is familiar with this story from Charlemagne's time. Oh, she's helping with the All Saints. And it was a story of, this great sort of saint warrior who, it was a not modern, but, medieval David and Goliath story where this huge giant Farragut was feared by the armies of Charlemagne in that area, but they, both sides agreed to two champions can battle one another. And so Roldan put himself forward and for this battle against a giant. And the battle went on for 2 days, sword and hand weapon battle. And by the end of, and they would take nighttime breaks, truces, to sleep. And then they would go at it again the next day. Different type of warfare, right? And
9 to 5.
sort of a day job, I guess. But toward the end of the second day, I guess the giant revealed to Roldan that he had one vulnerable place in his navel, and that was how Roldan slew him, and was victorious. So this is the kind of story that I had never heard. But you walk through the Spanish countryside, and you have these little things like this little beehive, old stone building that marks that site. And everyone knows these stories. This is part of the mix of stories that get told. So I would like, around your tables, for you to talk about what was the most important story, tale, or myth for you growing up. And I invite the children and youth into this conversation too, if you want to join them, because we kind of need your perspective. And then, because the second question, what do you think is the most prominent story, tale, or myth that are told to children and youth in our part of the world today? What's the story, what are the stories everyone knows? Are there, there isn't sort of, there are so many sources of information now, but to the best of our, what we can do, what are the stories everyone knows? And then thirdly, what's the role of the church in telling stories not only from the Bible, but also from Christian history? How are we doing? How could we do this differently? So those are some big questions, but take them in that order. Let everyone who wants to share what was pick one, most important storyteller myth for you growing up, and what do you think is the most prominent story? So go. So stories are humans are built for stories, right? We will always be sharing and telling stories. And you said superheroes and villains and Disney are our biggest storytellers. Maybe the Marvel universe is pretty big right now. And there's a commercialized aspect, right? There's action figures, there's all the merchandise and copyrights around those things. And, some of them also are kind of giving expression to some great human myth, right? It's a mixed thing. It's like, I like a good Disney movie as well as anyone. I watched Coco again this week because it's that time of year, right? What about that last question about what's the church's role in telling stories, not only from the Bible, but from Christian history since the Bible and in current and present day? Do we have a role in that? What do you think? I'm seeing a lot of
supposed to be all about Christian education.
Yeah.
Where's our?
Yeah.
Where are you?
So this is sort of I like this on All Saints because that is in some ways the role of the saints. Those who are named saints officially by the church these are stories that we need to tell, because the story of the Christian faith didn't end with the Bible. And when we say the creed, we're saying as much. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, forgiveness of sins, resurrection of the body, and life everlasting. So we're stating that we believe the Holy Spirit has continued to be active since Bible times and throughout history, up into including today and tomorrow. So you've probably noticed that I try to talk about some of the saints and their stories as well as the Bible, and I hope we all might want to. Some Lent seasons, we've told some saint stories and had some saint competitions around here. For that purpose of lifting up, wow, what does it mean to live out a life in Christ, not only 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, but maybe 1,200 years ago in Spain, or 40 years ago in South Africa, or, yesterday in California. So that, and the thing is, nobody else will tell those stories for us. I heard this story that I shared in the sermon today about Desmond Tutu, and I searched all the newspaper archives, and they reported that there had been a ban on assembly, and that Tutu did lead a worship service, and that the security forces showed up. They didn't tell the rest of the story in any major news outlet. They didn't say what actually happened inside the church that day. That's our story. Those are our stories to tell, and I think I probably heard it the first time at, I don't know, a synod assembly or some other gathering or someone else's sermon. So, we get to tell these stories. And one of the things that did come across in El Camino de Santiago is how naturally and freely many of the Spanish people just tell these stories. And I thought, wow, what it would be like for us to cultivate that amongst ourselves here. That we just kind of swapped, stories of saints or sanctified living, not just not just on the formal times, like in a sermon, but in everyday speech. I'll give you some more examples in the sessions to come of how that can be done. But it was really moving to me to be a part of, and that's part of the way, right? Is that pilgrims are taking it in and learning. Yes.
Well, I was raised as a Catholic with a catechism, and they often talked about the saints as models for living.
Yeah.
And really brought that out. And in the Episcopal Church, we would always get an ordo calendar, which listed all the saints' celebration days, and it was often a time to pique one's interest and say, why is this person's name? What did they do? Because they have to have some sort of, I won't say superhuman, but particularly blessed aspect to their life to even be considered for sainthood.
That's correct. So in the Catholic Church, what are the criteria? There have to be verified miracles. Two verified miracles, however one defines that. Now, I would personally define a miracle as not outside the laws of nature, but I think, as a former scientist, our understanding of the laws of nature is who knows where we are. We might still be in our infancy, right? I mean, who thought that quarks with spin and charm and all of that might be at the heart of matter? What are the laws of relativity? String theory posits there might be 10 or 11 dimensions to reality. It's all mind-blowing stuff, right? So there can be laws of nature at work that we don't even comprehend, right? But that perhaps someone taps into. And I don't claim a miracle, but I claim a special blessing. This week, with Voices School here, our church library isn't as functional as a library, and the whole children's section bookcase was turned to the wall. And so it's basically inaccessible, but I really wanted to read Enemy Pie this morning. I'm too late to get it from the public library, I think, so I tried to move the bookshelf out, and I got it this far out from the wall. So I could reach in my hand, and I thought, okay, Anita, this is really stupid, but here goes. Blind pulling. And I pulled a book, I knew that Derek Munson was the author, and it started with an M, so I pulled a book, started with L, and went, well, kind of close. Pulled another book. Okay, one more try. It was Enemy Pie. Oh, okay, I'll take it. Who knows? I think we can celebrate the little things, right? When it's just kind of funny and joyful. And that's saint-like behavior. That's not loving an enemy and all of that. But, I think I would encourage us. I think as a church we do this, but we could do it a lot more. And that's part of our public witness, is simply, telling these stories out loud. And sometimes it involves giving permission for very personal stories to be told. And I know that many of us, that may not be for everyone, but many of us really appreciate people like Tom Dunham, who lived his life so openly that he was willing for some of those very personal stories of grace and transformation to be told and shared in public. And that gives some, it heartens us who get to listen to each other.
See, it's interesting. I've read some things in the past about how they maybe it's related to trials and witness testimony and things, but it's like the more you tell a story, it actually starts to morph. And it might be later on you swear it's absolute truth, but it's actually different than the reality of what happened. We were talking about what makes a myth at our table, and what's really important is kind of the essence of the moral or something. Of the story. And that's why I think telling stories is really important, because it says at the end of the day who we are, what we believe, and the absolute veracity of the story and those kinds of things. If we get some of these things that maybe violate the laws of nature or what have you, that might be less important. It's really the message of the story.
Thank you. Okay, other comments on stories? So I hope with these stories along the way, we're cracking open some stories with each other that we can tell more freely. And as I mentioned in the sermon, that we can explicitly give praise and thanks to God. Because we do live in a post-theistic age around here. It's not only Christians, it's also Jews and Muslims are weirdos for saying God. For just, instead of saying, oh, it's a good energy today, or, instead of saying, God is present. And, just being willing to say out loud the reality we believe and perceive. And you can do it in a way that's really invitational and not being a jerk. And I think sometimes because we're sometimes afraid of being a jerk or being like that, we are too shy about just simply owning our faith and inviting others into that story. So in the city of Nájera, I stayed in La Posada Ignatius. This was a hostel that did have private rooms. And so it was named for him because the man we today call St. Ignatius, as a young man, was a general in an army for the Duke of Nájera. And he stayed, that was his headquarters, this stone building that's still in that city. Now, when he was out on a battlefield not far from there, his leg was badly injured, and he was very disconsolate to lose that part of himself. He was somewhat vain, and so he kept having surgeries so that he wouldn't limp, but it never quite went away. And so during long convalescences, he started reading and praying for more seriously the first time in his life. And he took long periods of silence and was given, after a while, decided to just detach from the military life and pursue more time in prayer and silence, and worked out what we now know as the spiritual exercises, which is a month-long retreat that can be done in a month full-time or over the course of a year or more if you do pieces of it as a spiritual retreat. And it's still kind of some foundational practices around prayer, around some of the practices we teach, like Lectio Divina, around discernment, and many other things. So we're reminded of St. Ignatius, and this is what, looking out the window, there's a modern radiator in there, but the old window and the old place that is preserved. So at this point in the walk, for many, many days, I'm in a place called La Meseta. It's a lot of walking through fields.
Mhm.
Just walking through fields. Imagine walking across Iowa. Now there's beauty in it because there was a poppy bloom, and there are little villages from time to time, but this is a place along El Camino de Santiago of deepening because you're just there. And I stopped in a place like this. This was just a couple, and they had, next to where they lived, they had a little apartamento, they called it apartment, that was basically a room with a pretty old bed and a little sink and mini fridge. So they called it Apartamento San Francisco 58, because it was on San Francisco Street. So anyway, I think they only had, that one room, maybe two, but so you get to.
Which door did you use?
So I didn't look for the side door. I was kind of tired. So this is another little town, the next town along the way, and here's another little saint story. Santo Domingo. Does anyone know Santo Domingo's story? Santo Domingo de la Calzada? Okay, legend has it that a pilgrim couple and their son stopped at an inn here on the way up to Santiago. The pretty innkeeper's daughter had her eye on the handsome lad, but the devout young fellow thwarted her advances. Incensed by his refusal, she hid a silver goblet in his backpack and reported him for stealing it. The innocent lad was caught and condemned to hang. Some accounts suggest the parents continued on their way, oblivious to the fate of their son, and on their return from Santiago, they found him still hanging on the gallows, but miraculously still alive thanks to the intervention of Santo Domingo. They rushed to the sheriff's house and found his lordship about to tuck into dinner. Upon hearing the parents, he retorted that their son was no more alive than the cock he was about to eat, whereupon the fowl stood up on the dish and crowed loudly. The miracle was not lost on the sheriff, who rushed back to the gallows and cut down the poor lad, who was given a full pardon. We are left to speculate on the fate of the foxy maiden. So that is one of the purported miracles of Santo Domingo. But Santo Domingo was a giant among men, born in 1019 to humble surroundings in Valoria. His effort to heed God's call to become a monk was thwarted by the monastery at San Milan, who were not inclined to accept this illiterate son, but the loss to the intelligentsia has been the gain of pilgrims for the last millennium. He built a pilgrim hospital, now the Parador, and a church which evolved into the cathedral. Both are situated in the historic town square. And so his spirit is that of humble, faithful people who do what they can to help others along the way. So there's another saint story for us today. After La Rioja entered the largest region, which is Castilla y León, Castile and León, and it's one region together, junta, but they actually are like friendly rivals in all things. The two main cities, Burgos in Castile and León, are each try to be the best and rival each other. They each think their cathedral is the most beautiful. In sports and in culture and in everything else, they're constantly competing. This was a little town church, and I went in there, and there were just some women cleaning the church. That was the only activity going on. But I looked at, like so many, it was just amazing. Like, we don't have little town churches like this around us. But they were happy, proud of it. And I said, that stone, colorful stone, is so beautiful on the front of the altar. She said, oh yeah, that's just from around here. They just dug that up, many centuries ago and polished it up and put that in place. So when I got to Villafranca Montes de Oca, it's a tiny little town, about 60 people. And they're there just to provide hospitality to pilgrims. That's the only, so there's a tiny little tienda or market that's open for a few hours most days, and a couple of places to stay at a restaurant, and some retired folks. And so this beautiful church is no longer open, but that's an example of, a parish church that's left standing from days when it was a bigger town, and they could keep it going. Then continued to come across monuments to different points in human history, and this was placed by relatives of 300 persons shot during the first months of the Spanish Civil War in that region. And so again, we talked before about how monuments can sometimes tell those stories of our history, including the ones that some want to forget, but that we maybe are wiser not to forget.
Show one out of Puig, Franco. There are places around Spain that are still praising him.
That's correct. There are also places praising Franco. So this fellow, you can see this is just a little stretch of woods in between the open areas, but he comes out there most days. Pilgrims who'd walked that way before said, oh, we're almost to the guy. And so you can see he, for a small price, he offers all kinds of fruits and jamon and other things that you might want to have. And he just wants to stand and talk and tell stories. And one of his, one-liners is, oh, in Spain we love to, we just love to be together. In the United States, you live to work, we work to live. So that's kind of one of his one-liners of some of the cultural distinctions that he would say exist between us.
That's quite a table slap.
Isn't it? Yeah. So, and then, different, these were a couple of college students I spent a little more time with because I started walking with them, and they were really interested in a couple of things in particular, religion or faith and science, Christian faith in particular, and the role of women in the church. And one of them was really curious and more wanting, very, very pro-science and well, what does the Bible really say about women? The other was much more kind of fundamentalist and happy in that viewpoint about, the earth is about 6,000 years old, and women have prescribed roles according to the Bible. And so we just had a big old conversation that day and enjoyed it. And, other pilgrims, these two are from Santa Cruz. So
They went inside you.
So, and I saw them like many points along the way. I kept kind of coming across them. One of them is a therapist, retired, and the other has been a bookkeeper for nonprofits. And, we haven't stayed in touch so far, but we may. We'll see. And then come across an archaeological interpretive center A little to the north of there are the caves of Altamira, where there are 13 to 14,000-year-old cave paintings that some say are the oldest in Europe. Oldest evidence of human activity in Europe.
So far.
And it's well worth going to see the reproduction of it.
Yeah.
You can't get in the cave anymore.
No, only scholars are, of course, allowed into the actual cave. So we're at the end of our time, so maybe we'll pick up in Burgos and more stories, more conversations and faith. So any closing thoughts? Thank you. Continue to tell the good stories.